I still remember the sound the keys made when they hit my palm-solid cold final. After 13 years of side hustles, roommates skipping meals and saying no to everything that wasn't rent or tuition, I finally had something that was mine. A modest 3-bedroom just outside Sacramento, nothing flashy, but it had a backyard big enough for a garden and the kind of quiet I hadn't known in years. I walked through the empty living room, ran my hand along the walls, and let myself believe I had crossed the finish line. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a call from my dad. I answered expecting congratulations, maybe a "we're proud of you, even if forced." But his face was still unreadable, as if he was preparing for a negotiation instead of celebrating a milestone. "We've talked it over," he said, glancing off camera as if someone else was feeding him lines. "And we think it'd be fairer if Celeste had the house." I blinked. "What, she's drowning in student loans? You've got a good job now. You can always buy another." It hit me. Then he wasn't joking. I laughed out of reflex, but he didn't crack a smile. Later that night, my mom called too. Her voice was softer but more pointed. "We raised you, Elijah. We gave you everything. Your sister needs stability. It's time you give back." I hung up before my voice could break. I'd spent years making peace with being the forgotten child, the one who learned to rely on no one. But I never imagined they'd come for the one thing I'd built without them. The knock came 5 days later. A courier stood at my door with a manila envelope. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. I started working at 16, not because I wanted pocket money, but because I needed to help pay the electric bill. My parents never said we were poor, but they made it clear there wasn't room for extras. So while my classmates joined clubs or played sports, I spent afternoons delivering pizzas in a beat-up borrowed car, juggling homework between shifts, smelling like garlic and burnt crust. I skipped prom because the ticket was $80 and I needed that money for gas. I still remember the look on my teacher's face when I said I wasn't going. Pity mostly, but I didn't want pity. I just wanted space to breathe. I bought my first car that summer, a '98 Honda with 200,000 miles and a radio that only worked when I banged the dashboard. I paid $700 cash. No loans, no help, just tips, scraped coins, and long nights. Community college was the cheapest option, so I commuted, worked full-time as a busboy, and later a grocery stocker. I took classes at night, ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, and learned to survive on 5 hours of sleep. When my friends talked about parties or vacations, I just nodded and pretended I understood. At 21, I enrolled in a coding boot camp. I took a chance, maxed out a tiny emergency fund to cover the fee, and told myself it had to work. And it did. My first job in cybersecurity paid less than what most people expect, but it was enough to get out of the basement I'd been renting with 3 roommates. No one in my family ever asked how I managed. They just assumed I was lucky. By 25, I had a stable job, no debt, and a spreadsheet that tracked every dollar I spent. No designer clothes, no birthday dinners, no trips to Cabo. Just discipline and the quiet kind of desperation that teaches you never to trust comfort. When I told my parents I'd gotten promoted, my dad changed the subject. When I shared that I'd hit my savings goal, my mom said, "That's nice, honey," then asked if I could send Celeste money for her rent. So I stopped sharing. They only saw the surface. Elijah has a good job now. Elijah can help. Elijah should give back. But they never asked what it took to get there, and they sure as hell never asked what it cost me when they chose her every single time. Celeste was always the one they showed off. She had the smile, the charm, the perfectly edited life. When she got accepted into the private art school upstate, Mom threw a dinner party. They toasted her with wine I wasn't allowed to touch and called her their bright star. No one mentioned that I was still washing dishes at a diner to pay for my textbooks. By the time she was 19, Celeste was off to Florence for a semester abroad. 2 months later, Paris. They sent her photos of gelato and cobblestone alleys like postcards of pride, bragging to every neighbor who'd listen. Meanwhile, I was in a windowless server room, learning how to patch security protocols on ancient machines, eating tuna from a can. She got a brand new hybrid when she turned 16. I got a lecture about responsibility when I asked to borrow the car to get to work. When I was 20, my laptop died mid-semester. I asked if they could help me cover the cost of a used one. My mother sighed and said gently, "We're focused on Celeste's needs right now. She's applying to grad school and art materials aren't cheap." That was the last time I asked them for anything. Celeste went on to earn a master's in art history, fully paid for. She never worked a part-time job, not once. When I visited home, her old bedroom was filled with expensive prints and custom furniture. Mine had been turned into storage. Aunt Raylin was always right there, too. My dad's sister, but more like Celeste's personal cheerleader. She never hid her opinion. Celeste has presence, she'd say at family gatherings. She's cultured. Elijah's just technical. When I got hired at a mid-tier tech firm, Aunt Raylin told me it was cute that I found something stable. When I got promoted, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "Well, money doesn't buy taste." I never understood her hostility until years later. She wanted a version of the family that fit into a polished narrative, one she could talk about over brunch. Celeste fit. I didn't. Still, I kept my distance and built my own life, assuming they'd leave me alone as long as I stayed out of their spotlight. I didn't know then that my success would become a threat, not a triumph. And I definitely didn't know it would lead them to a courthouse with my name on the summons. The envelope was thick, heavier than I expected. My name was typed cleanly on the front bold letters, centered like an accusation. I opened it at the kitchen table, hands steady, but chest tightening, and started reading line by line, not quite believing what I was seeing. According to the lawsuit, I owed my parents $290,000 for child-rearing investment. That was the phrase, like I was a business venture that hadn't paid dividends. They'd attached itemized estimates of food, clothing, school supplies, even birthday party expenses. A $12.99 receipt from a toy store was included as proof of care. They argued that I had achieved financial success directly because of their sacrifices, and that morally and financially I owed them. But that wasn't even the most insane part. They were demanding that I transfer the deed of my new home to Celeste. Immediately. On top of that, they wanted me to continue paying the mortgage for 2 more years until she was financially stable enough to assume it herself. I stared at the last page for a long time. There were spaces for signatures, my name, hers, my parents'. The words property transfer and familial obligation repeated like a threat, dressed up in legal language. I didn't even know where to begin. 2 days later, I got a call from my cousin Lana. Her voice was tight, apologetic. She said she overheard Aunt Raylin at a family brunch, talking about how she had paid the lawyer's retainer. "It's time Elijah learned his place," she'd said. "He can play grown-up with his little tech job, but that house belongs in the family." That night, Celeste posted a filtered photo on Instagram, some dreamy living room pulled from Pinterest, with the caption, "So grateful to fight for what's fair." Family means standing up for each other even when it's hard. There were already dozens of likes, heart emojis, comments from old neighbors and distant relatives. One said, "Proud of you for being brave." Another, "Your brother's always been cold. You deserve this." I didn't respond. I didn't post anything. I didn't defend myself. I spent the night reviewing bank statements, mortgage documents, scanning receipts I'd kept in an old shoebox for no reason other than habit. Everything I owned, everything I'd worked for, was suddenly something they believed they could claim. I didn't want to go to court. I didn't want the drama. But I knew if I didn't fight back, they'd take everything and still paint me as the villain. So I called the courthouse the next morning and confirmed the date on the summons. I opened a folder, slid in the first set of documents, and labeled it Defense. It didn't take long before my mother took the fight online. The morning after I filed my response with the court, a cousin sent me a screenshot of her latest Facebook post. At the top, in all caps, she'd written, "Some sons forget where they came from." Below that, a long, winding rant about ungrateful children, broken values, and how heartbreaking it was to watch a family fall apart because someone got selfish with their success. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't need to. People in our town knew exactly who she meant. Comments flooded in, some sympathetic, some venomous. I recognized the names of old neighbors, church friends, even a couple of my former high school teachers. Some called it a sad story, others praised her honesty. Not one person asked for my side. Then came the group text. My mom sent it to the extended family thread. No greeting, just a short, sharp message. Due to recent choices that have deeply hurt this family, Elijah will not be joining us for Thanksgiving this year. We hope he reflects on what truly matters. I stared at the screen for a full minute before closing the chat and muting it. I hadn't planned on going anyway, but not everyone stayed quiet. That same night I got a call from Grandpa Walter. His voice was gruff, but there was a tremble in it I hadn't heard before. "I told them to back off," he said. "Told them they were out of line." He paused. "I'm proud of you, son. You've done more on your own than they ever did with help." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until the lump rose in my throat. Over the next week, private messages started trickling in cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, some I barely knew. They'd read the post, then read the comments, and finally decided to reach out. "Your mom used to borrow my financial aid money. Remember when they made you mow the yard while Celeste got a pedicure?" "Yeah, I noticed. I asked them for help with textbooks in college. They said no, then bought Celeste a MacBook." The messages kept coming. Quiet acknowledgments, small truths spoken too late. But still they meant something, because for the first time in a long time I wasn't entirely alone, and I knew the silence that had protected them for years was starting to crack. I got to the courthouse early, wearing the only suit I owned, navy blue, a little tight in the shoulders. I carried a simple folder packed with everything I'd spent the last month organizing: tax returns, mortgage paperwork, bank statements, even emails from college where I'd been denied help paying for books. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew the truth didn't need a script. They walked in together, my parents Celeste and Aunt Raylin, like they were headed to a family reunion instead of a civil hearing. All four wore matching white T-shirts that said "Family First" in big red block letters. I almost laughed. Almost. Celeste made a show of hugging the clerk and dabbing her eyes like this was some kind of sad documentary. Aunt Raylin gave me a look that was all smirk and no warmth. I kept my head down and waited for the judge. When the proceedings began, their lawyer, a jittery man with too much gel in his hair, stood up and launched into a speech about emotional investment, family legacy, and the moral obligation I had to support my sister. He presented exhibits like they were Weapons' old family photo albums, a report on Celeste's student loan debt, and most unbelievably, a spreadsheet that listed every childhood meal they had supposedly paid for, including a Happy Meal from 2003. Then Celeste took the stand. She spoke about her dreams, how she'd always wanted to create a space where artists could gather, heal, and collaborate. She called it an emotional retreat center. The house I bought my house was perfect for it, she said, because it had good energy. When the judge asked about her employment status, Celeste straightened her back. "I'm a digital creator," she said proudly, "and a part-time dancer." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Are you currently earning income from either?" There was a long pause. Then Celeste replied, "I'm building my brand. These things take time." My mother leaned forward. "She's an artist," she said quickly. "She needs support. She's not like Elijah. He only cares about money." The judge looked down and tapped her pen against the desk, once, then turned to me. I stood and walked slowly to the front. I didn't raise my voice or deliver a speech. I simply submitted my documents. Proof that every dollar toward the house came from my savings, pay stubs, the deed in my name, my community college diploma, records showing I'd been financially independent since I was 18. I included an email from my sophomore year asking for help with tuition and my father's reply. "We're focusing on Celeste's path right now." The judge flipped through the pages silently. No questions. No one said anything for a while. Then the judge closed the folder and announced that she would issue a written ruling within the week. Just like that, it was over for now. We filed out in silence, but the storm was already building outside the courthouse doors. 5 days after the hearing, I opened my mailbox to find a thin envelope with the court's seal. The letter inside was brief and absolute. The case had been dismissed. The judge's language was clear, no legal merit whatsoever. I read it twice, then folded it carefully, and placed it in the same folder I had brought to court. When I arrived at the courthouse to collect copies of the final documentation, they were already there. Celeste was sitting on the steps crying so loudly it felt performative. Her makeup streaked in dramatic lines, her hands clutched to her chest like she'd lost something sacred. Aunt Raylin stood beside her red-faced and shouting that I had manipulated the system. My mother kept her distance but didn't hold back. "You're no son of mine," she said coldly, just loud enough for everyone to hear. I didn't respond. I didn't look at any of them. I just walked past, holding the folder close, like it was some kind of shield. That night I installed a new lock on the gate, just in case. Later that week, my security camera picked up movement in the driveway around midnight. I reviewed the footage the next morning with a pit in my stomach. Celeste had approached my car, slowly pausing near the passenger side and looking over her shoulder more than once. She didn't touch anything, just stood there for a moment like she was waiting for something that never came, then turned and walked away. An hour later, Aunt Raylin appeared on the feed. She was holding a spray paint can in one hand, wearing a hoodie pulled low over her forehead. She stepped onto the driveway, but the motion sensor lights snapped on, flooding the space in harsh white. She froze, glanced toward the camera, then backed off. I downloaded the clips and saved them to a flash drive. This wasn't over, not really, and I had the sinking feeling that what came next wouldn't happen in a courtroom. The GoFundMe popped up 2 days after the security footage incident. A friend from college texted me the link with the caption, "You seeing this?" I clicked it and stared at the screen in disbelief. "Help me rebuild my life after my brother stole my future," the title read. Below was a carefully crafted sob story about a heartless sibling, a broken family, and a young artist left homeless. She used photos of my house pictures she had never taken, clearly lifted from Pinterest, and ended with a request for $85,000 to start over, somewhere safe. People donated. Not many, but enough to make my chest tighten. I reported the campaign immediately. It took less than 48 hours for the platform to take it down for misrepresentation. They flagged her account, and the comments disappeared with it. But the fact that she had tried so publicly and shamelessly hit harder than I expected. The next day, my office HR forwarded me an email. Aunt Raylin had sent a message to the general company inbox claiming I had a long history of emotional instability and wasn't fit to work in cybersecurity. She even included the court case number, hoping it would make her sound credible. Instead, she earned herself a formal warning from her own employer after I filed a complaint. The email was now part of my documentation for a restraining order. Meanwhile, the family chat exploded. Cousin after cousin started replying to the Thanksgiving message thread, dragging skeletons out of closets no one had dared touch for years. Stories of being left out asked for money overlooked, while Celeste was praised. Old wounds reopened in a matter of hours. You paid $200K for her degree. I worked night shifts to finish mine. She got a car. I got a guilt trip. My parents paid for my wedding. You gave Celeste 15 grand and didn't even RSVP. They weren't talking to me. They were talking around me. But I saw every message. For once, the truth wasn't mine to carry alone. That weekend, Grandpa Walter showed up with a set of old tools and a cooler full of sandwich fixings. We spent the afternoon in the garage sanding down an old workbench and not saying much. At one point, he looked at me and said, "I should have stepped in a long time ago." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We both knew he just had. 3 months passed. The quiet settled in slowly, like dust after a storm. I got promoted at work, more responsibility, better hours, a corner desk with actual sunlight. It didn't feel like victory, just a kind of relief. Something solid under my feet again. I adopted a rescue dog, a mutt, with cautious eyes and a lopsided grin I couldn't resist. I named her Nola. She followed me from room to room like I might disappear if she blinked. I understood the feeling. I upgraded the home security system cameras with cloud backup motion-triggered alerts, reinforced locks. Not because I was afraid, just because I was tired of being caught off guard. Every now and then a text would slip through from my mother. Sometimes just one word, help. Sometimes longer. We're struggling, Elijah. Family helps each other. I never replied. The last message came in an email from my father. When will you forgive us? Family should stick together. I read it once and archived it without a word. On Sundays, Grandpa Walter started coming by with fresh bread or leftover stew. We didn't talk about the rest of them anymore. We just built things. He taught me how to hold a chisel, write how to sand with the grain. He carved without needing to measure. I followed his lead. One evening, as the light slipped low across the fence, we stood in the backyard, Nola chasing shadows in the grass. Grandpa wiped sawdust from his hands and looked at me like he was still trying to understand how the quiet kid from all those years ago had built this life from scraps. "You made it," he said, "and you did it without them." I nodded but didn't speak. Some things don't need saying, and in the stillness I thought, did they ever love me or just the idea of controlling me? Would they have still sued me? If I'd been the obedient son they wanted? Maybe some families aren't broken. Maybe they were never whole to begin with.